Tonight at 10, a new Afghan government could be in place by tomorrow. The Taliban claims its approach will be inclusive. In Kandahar today, a victory parade featuring some of the military equipment left behind by US forces. In the capital, Kabul, the Taliban is promising roles for women in the new government, but not at senior levels.
In this new government which has been announced, in the top posts, I mean to say in the cabinet, they may not be women.
We'll have the latest on events in Kabul as thousands more Afghans wait to see if they'll be allowed to leave. Here in the UK, some Afghan migrants met ministers as more details of a resettlement scheme are announced. In Scotland, vaccine passports will be needed later this month to visit nightclubs and to attend larger live events. And why the shortage of some beers at Wetherspoons is being blamed on Brexit and on the pandemic.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel, Dan Evans equals his best performance at a US Open. He's into the third round after beating American Marcus Giron.
Good evening. A new Afghan government composed of senior Taliban figures could be announced as early as tomorrow. A Taliban spokesman told the BBC today it will be an inclusive government with some roles for women, but none in the highest positions. He also insisted that Afghans with the right documents would be allowed to leave the country, but there is still deep concern about the fate of countless people wanting to flee. During the day, the Taliban staged victory parades featuring some of the military equipment that's been left behind by the Americans. Our correspondent Sekunda Kimani reports now from Kabul.
The Taliban are in firm control of the country. This, a huge military parade in the southern city of Kandahar, along with a captured helicopter. But the group still hasn't established a new government, leaving many Afghans in a state of limbo. Now that the final foreign troops have left, an announcement is expected soon. The last time the group was in power in the 1990s, their regime saw public executions and women banned from working. Now they say things are different, though they admit women won't be in senior positions.
Maybe they will be in the government in the lower these things, because in every department of the government, ministries, you can say almost half of the workers are women. So they can come back to their work and they can continue. But maybe in this new government which has been announced, in the top posts, I mean to say in the cabinet, they may not be women.
The uncertainty about what the future will look like has seen the value of the Afghani drop and concerns about the economy rise. The World Bank and IMF are holding back from continuing support, whilst the US has frozen reserves and most local banks remain closed.
No one has any money right now. All their savings are stuck in the banks. People are just bringing small amounts of cash here to exchange, to pay for everyday living.
I needed money for groceries, but the exchange rate isn't good, so I'm going home. The currency rate just keeps on fluctuating. I pray that God brings stability to the government and these problems can be solved.
The Afghan economy has been heavily dependent on international aid. Whether or not that continues, at least when it comes to the West, is likely to be dependent on what kind of government the Taliban create, what kind of laws it enforces. Governing Afghanistan is going to prove a bigger challenge for the Taliban than taking control of it. They've been holding meetings with senior political figures like former President Hamid Karzai, but many doubt whether they're willing to really share power. Their elusive leader, Mullah Haibatullah, may well be declared leader of an Islamic emirate. These new pictures of some of the final US troops to be withdrawn from Afghanistan. The focus now is on what they've left behind. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Let's go live to Kabul and our chief international correspondent there, Lise Doucette. Lise, the Taliban talks about an inclusive government. How inclusive will that be in your view?
Well, there's this magical word of inclusive is being used by Afghanistan's neighbours to try to put pressure on the Taliban to share some of the power so they don't have absolute control. But look at it in pure political terms. The Taliban have come to power much more quickly than even they expected. They now control more territory in Afghanistan than even when they were in power in the 1990s. So they feel they have an overwhelming mandate to pursue their overriding objective, and that is, we use words like government, cabinet. Their objective is to establish an Islamic system. So the choice of who is in, to use the word, the cabinet is going to be very much, they're now said to be discussing individuals on the basis of Islamic principles and Sharia law. Are these people corrupt? Did they work for the former government? And what about women? Women will not be playing a leading role. This is this new emerging Islamic emirate. Women will be playing secondary roles to men. We're hearing reports they'll play some roles, but not at the senior levels. And this is already very different from what we heard even 2 years ago when the Taliban started discussing with representatives of the Afghan government and civil society here. They had this platform of words where they said women can have any roles in our new Islamic government except the president or the prime minister, but they can be ministers, they can be CEOs. Now they seem to be rolling back from that because what happened in the past is now history. It's a new day for them, and it's a day when the Taliban are in charge.
Lise, many thanks once again. Lise Doucette, our chief international correspondent in Kabul. Well, among the many Afghan relatives and friends separated by the events of the past few weeks is the family of 7-month-old Gulreina, a baby split from her parents 4 months ago. Her father is a British national, but she's living with her grandparents now in Kabul because her passport has only just been issued. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been speaking to Gulreina's father. His identity has been concealed to protect the family.
Too young to know what has happened, too small to comprehend, she is stuck in Kabul without her parents. Gulreina, one of the youngest Britons left behind.
We are missing her a lot. You know how people feel when their child is outside the country and the country where there is a war and you don't know what's going to happen next.
Her parents thousands of miles away.
What?
This is the closest her dad, Mohammed, in London can get to her. He can only try to keep their bond alive. When Kabul fell, Gulreina still didn't have her UK passport. 5 months after her British father applied, his identity hidden for the family's safety.
She is stuck in Afghanistan because of the passport delay. If the passport took less time, she would have been here with us. And she is stuck there with my other part of the family, and they're all in danger. I called the consulate, when this everything happened, and they said she's not British here. You have to wait till her passport arrives, then she's British, then we can help you. I told them it's going to be too late.
Trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, Gulreina was born unexpectedly in Kabul in January, when her mother, an Afghan, was unable to return to the UK as planned after visiting relatives because she'd lost her UK ID card. She eventually got a temporary visa to return to Britain in May to get a replacement, but had to leave Gulreina behind with grandparents. Then the Taliban took over.
I want government to help me find me way, take them out, take my daughter and my family out of Afghanistan, and the government can do anything if they want to, and they can do it. Why not?
But how do you want the government to help when they don't have any soldiers on the ground?
They can help. They can find a way. They can find a way. These are their governments.
The government says it has evacuated more than 16,000 people from Afghanistan, but it knows more must be done to support those at risk. Government advice has long been for Britons not to travel to Afghanistan. Gulreina's mother says she is lost without her baby by her side, is losing hope, and begs the government to help.
Finally.
At 3 o'clock this afternoon, Gulreina's passport finally arrived. But with nearly half her short life separated from her parents, There's now no easy way to bring her home. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, in London, the government has given more details about its resettlement scheme for Afghan migrants. It says those who worked with the British government and military will be able to settle in the UK permanently. The Home Office says it wants to help Afghans in the UK to rebuild their lives, but so far, less than a third of local authorities have offered to help, as our Home editor Mark Easton explains.
15,000 Afghans have been evacuated to the UK in the last few weeks, and a further 5,000 are expected in the next year.
Shake hands, but we'll do the shoulders. There we go, brilliant.
Victoria Atkins has been appointed the Minister for Afghan Resettlement, overseeing what the government calls Operation Warm Welcome, but which is quickly turning into a hot political issue.
I've got 10,000 people in quarantine hotels at the moment who have to be housed as they come out. And so the challenges are big. The scale of this task is big. I don't shy away from that. But it's going to take us a little bit of time just to set some of these policy details in place.
Afghans are being given permanent residency with access to healthcare, housing, education and welfare. But having fled Kabul last month, this interpreter says it's proving difficult to start a new life here.
Do nothing. I'm just sitting at home. I'm looking for the job. I told them many times, the caseworkers, that please get me a job as soon as you can.
In Greenwich, the town hall has become an aid centre, with staff and volunteers operating a 24-hour shift system. But the council's Labour leaders say support from central government has been almost non-existent.
We've received a large number of about almost 700 newly arrived Afghans quarantining in one of our local hotels, and the pressure has been on. But not only that, they arrived, but there's been no support system in place to work with them. So, in fact, we have been stepping in the gap.
Local authorities across Britain have access to a share of £5 million in government funding for supporting and housing Afghans. But at the moment, fewer than a third of councils have offered to help find homes for the new arrivals.
The Home Office refuses to say who's come forward because they don't want to name and shame councils who may yet open their doors. But experience suggests that local authorities in East Anglia and the Fens take very few refugees and asylum seekers, while councils in the north east and north west of England take proportionately many more.
Here in Huddersfield, there were mixed views about whether local councils should answer the call to offer assistance.
There's not enough affordable housing, but yet they'll bring them over and they get a house so quick.
I think that's brilliant. I think it gives them an opportunity, it gives them a chance to rebuild their life.
I just think that we're absolutely already overrun, full.
It's good for the economy, it's good for our culture as well that we open and embrace those people who want to settle in the UK.
The Prime Minister has said Britain owes a huge debt of gratitude to those Afghans who risked their lives to support our armed forces. But helping thousands to permanently settle in the UK is clearly a challenge for the long term. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Giving evidence to MPs today, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has admitted he can't give a precise figure for the number of people eligible to come to the UK from Afghanistan. His own handling of the Afghan crisis was heavily criticised by some members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, including his time on holiday as the Taliban were tightening their grip on Afghanistan. Our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus was there.
Under pressure today, the Foreign Secretary. MPs believe he's been at the helm during the biggest foreign policy disaster in decades. So why did he fail to foresee the rapid fall of Kabul?
The central proposition was that given the troop withdrawal by the end of August, you would see a steady deterioration from that point. It's unlikely Kabul would fall this year.
The MP said a Foreign Office report from July had warned cities could fall.
Sorry, the source of that?
It's your principal risk report.
But Mr Raab still went on holiday.
We have UK personnel, UK civilians in harm's way, and I think it's important for us to know what you were doing and where you were doing it from. When did you go on holiday? I'm not looking to browbeat you over this, I just want to know when you went.
He said with the luxury of hindsight he wouldn't have gone. They asked why he hadn't called ambassadors in the region or even visited since he'd become Foreign Secretary.
Why did we get it so badly wrong?
Clearly the assessment that they would not be able to advance at that speed was not correct. and we'll need to look and assess about why that's the case.
And more questions about the effort to save lives. Why emails by desperate Afghans went unanswered.
We can answer every email that we get, or we can focus resource on getting as many eligible people through Kabul onto air flights, filling capacity back home.
And why he doesn't know how many are still at risk.
Could you tell me why you are confident of your numbers of those remaining in Afghanistan now?
We're not confident with any precision at all.
Finally, will the UK now deal with the Taliban?
Under what circumstances will the UK be recognised the Taliban, and what sort of recognition do you foresee?
First of all, we do not recognise governments generally, but I think it's also important not to confer any legitimacy on the Taliban. At the same time, we do need to be able to send clear and direct signals. We've done that for some time via their political commission.
The MPs asked Mr Raab if he'd considered resigning. He said no. And as for nation building, he said the UK might not do it in future in such circumstances, but would have to learn to live within its means. Mr Raab is now heading to the region, trying to secure exit routes for Afghans seeking to flee the Taliban. David Grammaticus, BBC News, Westminster.
So let's turn now to some of the day's other news. The group of medical experts which advises the UK government on vaccines has just announced that up to 500,000 people will be offered a third COVID jab in the coming months. The JCVI says it will be targeting people whose immune system is severely compromised. But the committee has still not decided whether 12 to 15-year-olds should be vaccinated. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, has the latest.
This daily cocktail of immunosuppressant medication is vital to prevent Hal Cohen's body from rejecting the kidney donated by his father. But the transplant medication also blocked his immune system from developing protection from 2 doses of COVID vaccine. The 40-year-old from North London is now eligible for a 3rd dose.
It's going to be really great for me to have a booster and hopefully give me some vaccine protection, the ability to turn to normal life, do things that other people are doing without thinking about it. But at the same time, it's not clear if the booster's going to work for myself and people like me. So we really do need to carry on looking at other treatments. See if there's any in here.
As well as transplant patients like Hal, those with blood cancers or advanced HIV will also be eligible. They'll all receive Pfizer or Moderna jabs.
We hope it will top up their immunity levels. Some of these people will not have mounted a good either antibody or T-cell memory response to 2 doses of the vaccine. And we hope a 3rd may help those individuals.
There are 2 more big decisions due on vaccines. Firstly, whether the over 80s should get a booster dose to help with waning immunity. And secondly, what about jabs for younger teens? With the new school year getting underway, there is mounting urgency for a decision on whether all 12 to 15-year-olds should be offered a COVID vaccine. Currently, only those with specific health conditions are eligible. But the scientists making the recommendation say they want to see new data on the benefits and risks. This is Emma just before she got COVID. More than a year later, the 14-year-old often struggles to walk because of persistent nausea and dizziness. A new study has found a significant minority of children do get long COVID.
Yeah, so I had to be in a wheelchair because basically the dizziness is triggered, or it gets worse by me walking around. If I start walking around, I just feel like I'm going to pass out. So it was very hard for me to get around school.
Vaccinating all over 12s would help suppress COVID outbreaks in schools. The US, France, Spain and Italy have all taken this approach. A final decision in the UK may come next week. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Let's take a look at the latest UK coronavirus figures then. There were 35,693 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means an average of 33,754 per day in the last week. The latest figures show there were 7,598 people in hospital being treated for COVID on Friday. 207 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. And that takes the average deaths per day over the past week to 106. On the vaccination front, 88.5% of people in the UK aged 16 and over have now had their first injection, and 78.9% of the population aged 16 and over have had both vaccinations. Now in Scotland, vaccine passports are set to be introduced for entry to nightclubs and larger live events sometime later this month. Let's talk to our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon, who's in Glasgow. Lorna, what's led to this? What's prompted the decision?
Well, Huw, COVID numbers are surging here in Scotland. They're 5 times higher than they were just 4 weeks ago. And Nicola Sturgeon says that she believes the limited use of a vaccine passport is appropriate and could help control the virus as we head into autumn and winter. You won't need this vaccine certification to use public transport, access education or the NHS, or enter shops, but you will need to prove you're double dosed if you want to go to a nightclub, if you want to go to many gigs or larger events like many football or rugby matches. Well, plenty of nightclub owners have been coming out expressing dismay, saying they think they're being singled out unfairly. We've heard from the football authorities, they're not happy. They say they've not been consulted, they don't think it's workable. And the Liberal Democrats have civil liberty concerns. They believe this will set a dangerous precedent. It will be debated on and voted on in the Scottish Parliament next week, and if it passes, vaccine passports will be introduced here by the end of the month.
Lorna, many thanks for the update there in Glasgow. Lorna Gordon, our correspondent. Now, the Ministry of Justice has confirmed that the child killer Colin Pitchfork has been released from prison. Pitchfork was jailed in 1988 for raping and murdering 2 15-year-old girls, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, in Leicestershire. The 61-year-old was freed after the parole board decided in June that it was safe for him to serve the rest of his life sentence on licence in the community. ITV has been cleared by the media regulator Ofcom in relation to criticism by presenter Piers Morgan of the Duchess of Sussex. His comments that he didn't believe what the Duchess had said in an interview with Oprah Winfrey led to nearly 58,000 complaints. It resulted in him leaving the show Good Morning Britain. Well, today he stood by what he'd said about Harry and Meghan.
I was entitled to not believe them. I was entitled to not believe them. And by the way, you're all entitled to not believe me. That is what happens in a democracy. So the idea that I had to lose my job for expressing a genuinely held opinion, I felt was ridiculous at the time, and I think it's ridiculous now.
That was Piers Morgan speaking earlier today. Now, the Wetherspoons chain says a number of its pubs have run out of some brands of beer because of problems with supplies. A shortage of lorry drivers is said to be an important factor in recent problems with logistics across the food and drink industry, and experts say that the pandemic is partly to blame, as are the effects of Brexit. Coca-Cola says it's also dealing with similar issues, including a shortage of aluminium cans. Our transport correspondent, Caroline Davies, has been taking a closer look.
It's now just gone 3:30 in the morning.
Long hours, fast food.
That'll do me for this evening.
Few facilities.
A squaddy shower, which consists of some wet wipes.
And often nowhere to park up. Life in Steve's cab over a few days, and it's not always easy.
Well, this is our bunk.
Nick is Steve's boss, and he's been driving for more than 40 years. He says conditions for HGV drivers have got worse, and he's worried it's putting young people off.
We used to park overnight in all the towns. For about the last 25 years, all those facilities have closed. Either we use these places here, which are expensive and not really secure, or you park in a lay-by.
What would be your advice to a young driver that's thinking about coming into this?
It's a sad thing to say, but I don't think you should.
There's a driver shortage across Europe, and the effects of it are already biting in the UK. The UK haulage industry says it's lost 14,000 drivers who've gone back to the EU this year. But it's not as simple as Brexit. Tax rules have changed, wages in Eastern Europe have gone up, and some, like Laurentu, now back in Romania after 6 years in the UK, wanted to be able to see their family more easily.
What sort of conversations did you have with other European drivers before you decided to come back?
Money, because they put in balance the money they could take in Europe, for example, and the money they get them here in UK, and the difference is not so big.
An estimated 30 to 45,000 drivers have left the industry in the last year. But the issue is not just about people leaving the industry, it's also about how quickly you can get new drivers in.
Remember that left mirror still?
Wages have surged and more people have signed up to train, but COVID and industrial disputes have meant that there are long delays.
It's taking 2 to 3 months just to get your provisional back, before another 2 months wait for a theory test, and then another 2 months wait after that to get into a lorry before you can start doing your lessons.
I think this bit would be easier for me.
Sam is one of those waiting. She signed up in January.
It's really frustrating because obviously a lot of companies need help and we need a job. So it's just really hard because it's not your fault, you're just waiting.
The government says it is introducing new measures, like streamlining the process for HGV drivers to get their licence. But it says that most of the solutions, including pay and conditions, needs to be driven by the industry. The driver shortage is a complicated mix of issues that are difficult to solve, but the rush is now on before Christmas to get more drivers on the road. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
Now, there's been another flurry of medals for Paralympics GB in Tokyo. David Smith won the team's 30th gold of the Games. He successfully defended his individual boccia title in the BC1 class to become the sport's most successful British player. There's also silver for swimmer Becky Redfern in the SB13 100 metres breaststroke. Cristiano Ronaldo has broken the world record for goals scored in men's international football tonight. 36-year-old hit his 110th and 111th goals for Portugal in their dramatic 2-1 World Cup qualifying win over the Republic of Ireland. Manchester United forwards also equalled Sergio Ramos's European record for men's caps with his 180th appearance for Portugal. Staying with football, Scotland were beaten 2-0 by Denmark in Copenhagen as both sides resumed their qualifying campaign for next year's World Cup. Defeat leaves Scotland fourth in their group. Adam Wilde was watching.
A summer of adventures now behind them. For Scotland, this was time to really begin plotting where they head next. The World Cup next year, that's the target. But that too is where Denmark are aiming, a team touched by near tragedy at the Euros, a football nation united still in the recovery of Christian Eriksen, emotions that remain clearly close to the surface.
And Denmark have an early lead.
Daniel Vass headed them on their way, Scotland almost immediately forced to rethink. Those thoughts barely collected before Denmark strode into a 2-goal lead. But had this effort from Billy Gilmore found its way in, things for Scotland may just have been different, especially as Ryan Fraser too went close. A frustrating defeat, still Scotland's hopes of reaching another major tournament certainly aren't over. The journey, though, gets a little more precarious. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
And that's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a good night.